Well, let's continue the conversation right now with our political panel. Joining us this week, Susan Smith, principal with the Blue Sky Strategy Group, Chuck Strahl, former Conservative MP and Cabinet Minister, and Anne McGrath, National Director for the NDP. Good to see all three of you.
Thanks for having me. See you.
Well, glad to have you, Chuck. So listen, here is the CPP. Let's start with that, because a national meeting is meant to happen with all the finance ministers from across the country. But should this be a meeting about crunching the numbers or coming up with a national defense for the CPP? Susan, I'll get you to start us off.
I think it's actually going to be national offense for the CPP, and the finance ministers who are opposed to what Premier Smith wants to do, i.e. take a bigger than 50% chunk of the CPP, are going to be pushing back. There are so many Canadians, who've contributed to the CPP, and it wasn't about the postal code that they lived in when they worked or the postal code that they live in when they collect. And that's the beauty and the strength of the CPP. And so I think the finance ministers are going to be on offense to protect it.
Chuck, what do you think?
Well, I think that's the case, yeah. Although, it's interesting that Danielle Smith opened with the numbers, not with the strategy. Because the numbers she opened with are gobsmacking, and whether they hold in the long run or not, it's certainly got the spidey senses all tingling amongst the rest of the finance ministers, and as they say, she's got their attention. But I think this first meeting is going to be about what can we do collectively to push back on her, and that's likely what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chuck is right that the numbers that she came out with at the very beginning were just so unbelievable. Like, gobsmacking is probably the right word. It was incredible to think that one province could say that they had over half of the fund. Let's remember, first of all, this is a very healthy fund. This is a very good pension plan, public pension plan, and it's actually been strengthened in recent years. So I think people will be very worried about it. And when we originally talked about this, we talked about the fact that she's going to face a lot of opposition in the province of Alberta, from citizens, from employer groups. She's going to face a lot of opposition in Alberta to this. But we also talked about the fact that she was going to face a lot of opposition from the other premiers. And that is a real weakness in her whatever her strategy is. It's a huge vulnerability, because when you're going to have other Conservative premiers like Ford and Moe probably and others are not going to be on board with this, and she's going to find herself increasingly isolated, I believe.
Yeah, well, and pointing out the fact that it was Ontario, and another province under a Conservative government, that raised the issue, called for this national meeting. We just spoke to the finance minister. But as you talk about this offense-defense for the CPP, I'm kind of wondering what the role of the federal government will be in that, and the kind of role that Justin Trudeau might play. Because here he is in Alberta, not very popular in the province, the party not very popular in the province. Would his involvement fighting for the CPP actually help Danielle Smith's side, since a lot of it also touches on grievances that Alberta has with Ottawa?
I think anything Justin Trudeau says in Alberta, or anything Danielle Smith says in most of the rest of the country, is already, people have made up their minds regardless of what they say. I think this will be a battle that all of the ministers will take up. It won't just be the Prime Minister. But Anne said it correctly. This is going to be an issue where Danielle Smith's going to find herself incredibly isolated, and ironically, it may benefit the Prime Minister, because the folks that are natural allies to Premier Smith, Scott Moe and others, in this case are opposed to what she wants to do. Her math doesn't add up. It's not in the interests of the citizens of any of the provinces. And I think, especially Albertans, she's not got a lot of people on side. She didn't campaign on it. They've got an opioid crisis. They have a housing affordability crisis. There was just a terrible crisis and tragedy in a daycare system. There's a lot of things going wrong, and this isn't the fight that I think Albertans want Danielle Smith to pick. So she's, I think, going to find herself, Team Alberta and everybody else on Team CPP.
Mm-hmm. Chuck, what do you have to say that? Because I am wondering about the type of role that Justin Trudeau might play, if any at all, in this.
Yeah, I don't think he has a choice. I mean, all the federal leaders are going to support the CPP, and I think they probably have to. But, Mr. Poilievre is not wrong to say that what's galvanized this thing at this time is a culmination of a bunch of things that, especially Albertans, but all the oil-producing provinces, feel that Mr. Trudeau has gone out of his way to pick on him. And some of that stuff has recently been declared unconstitutional even. So, there's not much doubt. This issue's been burbling since the firewall letter. and it's not new, but it's kind of coming to a head because people say, enough's enough. I mean, you got to let Alberta and the other provinces do what they do best, and it seems like at every turn, the Prime Minister is shafting them. And when that feeling starts to percolate, well, then people want to take action. I think this just happens to be the issue of the day, but it's certainly all part and parcel of what it's seen in Alberta, at least, as an aggressive anti-Alberta campaign by the Prime Minister.
It's being drummed up, Chuck. I mean, Alberta's oil and gas success, there's no question of what they've had, but it's been built on the backs, yes, of Albertans, but on Newfoundlanders and Nova Scotians and Prince Edward Islanders and Quebecers and people from all over the country that went and worked in the oil and gas sector. Some of them stayed in Alberta, some of them went back home. And so this is where I think Premier Smith has not only miscalculated the math on the CPP, she's miscalculated the sentiment on CPP. And there are ordinary Albertans who've contributed to that. Their children have contributed to that. They want a secure future. And people who worked in Alberta and have gone back home or live in other parts of the country, they want the secure future that they've earned as well. So this is where I think that Premier Smith is missing the boat.
Well,
I think she's made a miscalculation in that a lot of Albertans are very frustrated with the federal government, and it never hurts an Alberta premier to pick a fight with the federal government. But I think that there is a difference between the way Albertans feel about energy and natural resource questions versus other things like the Canada Pension Plan. So I think that juxtaposing the kind of anti-Ottawa sentiment that does exist in Alberta, legitimately so, and juxtaposing that into this issue, I think is a really big mistake, and that's, I think, where she's really, it's a big misstep. However, I can see partly why she's doing it. She is coming up to an annual general meeting, a convention, where there is a strong push by the Take Back Alberta folks to change a lot of things in the Constitution and in the way that the party works, and to weaken her grasp on the leadership. So she is partly playing to that particular part of the UCP.
Yeah, Chuck, I think I heard you want to jump in on that.
Yes, well, it's interesting to me that several premiers, not all of them, but several premiers have, risen to debate, I should say, and said, the numbers are crazy. The numbers are crazy. The whole thing is a lark. It never happened, so on. Yeah, they're plenty worried right now. The numbers may not be accurate. I don't know. But this thing's going to end up in court, and the numbers are going to be big. They're going to be huge. And when they're whatever they are, there's going to be, the reason they're all in a dither right now is because no matter what the numbers are, they're worried. Now, I say, I'm in favor of the CPP. I agree with Mr. Poilievre that it's, I hope Albertans follow that way, and they may well do so. But I don't think you should pretend that this isn't a big issue, because that's why the premiers are worried. It's a big issue because it's a big number.
Okay. Well, listen, we'll keep watching that. I do want to move on to another topic, because we did see Erin O'Toole, of course, a former Conservative leader, former MP, now private citizen, appearing before the House Procedures Committee today. And he was talking once again about foreign interference, still very concerned about it. And I want to begin with, a question that was asked of him by Michael Cooper, because here you have Mr. O'Toole being targeted by China in the 2021 campaign. But there's this 2-year gap before it was actually acknowledged by civil servants publicly, by the government publicly. And, Mr. Cooper asked whether or not the Prime Minister, in Mr. O'Toole's opinion, should be apologizing to him for that 2-year gap. But what do you say to that, Susan?
I was quite taken with the part of Mr. O'Toole's testimony or responses at committee where he said that multiple governments have been like the boiling frog when it comes to foreign interference. Multiple governments did not adequately take the concept of foreign interference seriously, and over time the nature and scope of it has changed and become a bit more aggressive. So I think what's very interesting there is that this is an issue that has been sort of maybe humming along, percolated up a bit further, and now we have a justice who's in a public inquiry finally into it. I think it's a been a challenging situation, and I think the government is re-looking how they do things. This is why you heard the Prime Minister come forward on the allegations with India right away and quickly. The media were about to go public. There's still a leak somewhere in our Secret Service where this kind of stuff is hitting journalists before it hits anything else. So I think the issue is how we address it. Whether or not the Prime Minister has an individual responsibility for an individual, I don't know. I think that's up for debate. But I think the way the governments handle this issue going forward has got to get a lot tougher.
Yeah, Chuck, what do you say to that? An apology, is it owed here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mr. Erin has said it, I think, very clearly. In fact, one of the reasons I supported him when he ran for leader initially in the first go there was because his policy on China was probably the most fleshed out part of his entire leadership campaign. He was tough on them, and I think for good reason. And certainly this, CSIS and CSE and others of the security establishment have repeatedly told Canadians and parliamentarians that China is the number one threat to our democracy. And it happened again just a couple of months ago. It's publicly known, and yet there doesn't seem to be a lot of action on it. Certainly, from Mr. O'Toole's point of view, you can see why he takes this a little bit personally. He waited 2 years, as did Mr. Chong, waited all this time while others seemed to know that they were actually in the crosshairs. And that's pretty discomforting for somebody who's a national leader or has been, and wonders why on earth couldn't the bureaucrats and the political class get their act together enough to warn them that this was happening.
Yeah, well, it was interesting to see that report earlier this week saying that there needs to be a greater education, if you will, for not only civil servants but also politicians to be aware. And what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it's got to be really alarming if you're one of those parliamentarians who discovers that this has been the case, whether it's Mr. O'Toole, Jenny Kwan in the NDP, Michael Chong, absolutely alarming. And I think that if there is fault in this, I don't think it's. I think where it is in the response. Once these allegations kind of really took hold and it became obvious that the evidence was mounting that there was a problem, not just with China, but China certainly very, very critical to all of this, the decision to go to a public inquiry took so long. I don't understand why the government was kind of dragged, screaming and kicking into what was the logical outcome of those kinds of allegations, and not just allegations, but also evidence.
Yeah, and to that, of course, now Justice Hogue is going to lead this public inquiry. We're waiting for an interim report sometime in February, which would be essentially a calendar year has passed since the news was broken on this. Are you concerned at all, or any of you concerned at all, that we're still waiting for action? And yes, there was the delay, but it seems that we're not getting a lot of news about how this inquiry is progressing.
Yeah, but that's the point, Mike. First of all, it's bigger. I'm glad, and I agree with you, it took a long time to get to public inquiry, and we need one. But the reality is this is national security. So this is not an inquiry that should take place with doors wide open and all cameras and microphones on at all time. I think there's more, it's a broader scope. There's more for the judge to review. And I think this is an adequate amount of time. Then nobody can say it's been rushed, it hasn't been thorough, in order to get the report. So I, for one, don't want our national security secrets and tactics aired on the front pages of anything. It's bad enough that we have foreign interference. Let's not make it easy for them to continue to interfere. So part of the process is, how this information or intelligence is gathered. You don't reveal that stuff because that lets them know what you're doing or how, what your allies are doing. So February, I think is fine.
Okay, Chuck, what do you think?
Well, February is fine as far as the Justice's report or interim report, and we all expect there to be some meat and potatoes on that one. But, a lot of this politically comes down to, what did you know, when did you know it, and what did you do about it? And some of that does not require any justice or anybody else to run interference. And the Prime Minister, there's nothing to stop him to say, I have instructed my staff the following way. I've instructed the bureaucrats the following way. Never again will somebody be a sitting parliamentarian be in the crosshairs again, that I'm not going to know about it, and that MP is not going to know about it and have the protection that he or she needs. There's nothing to stop that. And he should be doing that. He should be saying, when did I know? What did I do about it? And there's things he can do. He doesn't have to wait for a report to take a bunch of steps to make sure that that never happens again.
Okay, and last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are critical questions, and so I think that the kind of, you always say the proof is in the pudding. It'll be what is in that interim report about those questions. So, for instance, Mr. David Johnson was tasked with those exact questions as well. What did you know? When did you know it? What did you do about it? And he basically skated over it and said, oh, nothing to see here. And I think that was a big part. I mean, there were many other things, but that was a big part of, I think, the problem with that particular report that we got from him. So February, fine with me, but it's got to have some meat on the bones. It's got to have actually some substantive stuff in there. We do have to know, in particular, what did the Prime Minister's office know? When did they know it? What did they do about it?
Okay. Well, of course, we will talk again, but for now, thank you for that. To Susan, Anne in studio, thank you. As always, Chuck, really good to have you on the program today. Thank you for that.
Well, thanks for having me.